With Tears of the Kingdom releasing next week, I thought it would be a nice idea to look back on Breath of the Wild and what has made it so special. Nintendo's 2017 system sellers got on to win numerous Game of the Year awards, a phenomenal 97 on Metacritic, and has been credited with revolutionising the open world genre. So, what made Nintendo's magnum opus the absolute masterpiece that it became? Well, it all started, as all truly great open world games do, with the world. This is one of my favourite moments from Breath of the Wild. Notice how it isn't some big story moment, but a moment of calm in an icy area with faint atmospheric music playing in the background. And here's another, and again, it's not a moment of action or a big reveal, but it's me stumbling upon a shrine in the middle of nowhere, completely off track. This theme continues with every one of my favourite moments in Breath of the Wild, as its genius comes from how it allows you to make your own moments and doesn't get in the way. There is a story in Breath of the Wild, but you're free to ignore it and go at your own leisurely pace. That's why I've sunk over 150 hours into the game, but I've only actually completed the story once. The reason behind that is because Nintendo crafted the most incredible, immersive, stunningly beautiful open world that I've ever seen, both before and since. It begs to be explored, and every corner of the world yields some kind of reward for your efforts. Funnily enough though, it doesn't need to, as the exploration itself is so rewarding that it more than warrants the time that you'll spend climbing over every inch of its surface just to see what awaits you on the other side. This is the secret to Breath of the Wild's success. It doesn't force you to do anything, or make anything feel like work. There aren't a million map markers blinking at you from every direction, telling you exactly where you need to be and why you need to be there. There's just your own curiosity and intuition. Exploring Hyrule's gorgeous landscape is never mandatory, which is exactly why it feels all the more enticing. From almost the moment you step foot into Hyrule, you're free to explore every inch of it. There's a short tutorial area, known as the Great Plateau, which takes around an hour and gets you to grips with Link's tools and abilities, but after that you're given free rein to explore and discover as much of the world as you'd like. You'll want to discover as much as you can too, as there's no shortage of things to find wherever you go. Every time I start a new playthrough of Breath of the Wild, I go a different direction to start with, just to see if it changes my experience of the game. I think I've restarted the game at least 7 times now as well, and every time I have, it seemed like a completely new experience. There are a few shrines that I recall finding from previous playthroughs, but everything else feels totally new, and that's all because I started from a completely different angle. The key to how the world of Breath of the Wild feels so good to explore is that it feels so natural and lived in. The calamity that occurred 100 years ago and destroyed the kingdom of Hyrule has left it barren and empty of Hylians, but nature has thrived. It gives a very rugged feel to the world, as you'll come across the ruins of Hyrule's past, but they'll be overgrown, slick with rain, and swarmed by monsters. This emptiness that fills the land of Hyrule lends itself to what has become a quiet, almost wistfulness that's accentuated by soft piano music and low woodwind notes. There's many quiet moments in Breath of the Wild. There's never any silence, with the sounds of nature and occasional soft music as you explore, meaning that the feeling of emptiness never becomes too heavy. This exploration never becomes dull either, thanks to the different biomes and unique art style that's a huge credit to the design team at Nintendo. Breath of the Wild surprises me regularly, with stunning moments occurring often, moments that I'd expect to witness on far more high-end machinery and far more graphically dense games. I'll frequently stand at the peak of a mountain just to witness the soft glow of a sunset, or notice how the morning sun gleams off the tips of wet grass as I gallop through a field on horseback. It's astounding just how beautiful a game can be on the Switch, with its limited graphical power going to the right places, such as the bright but unsaturated colour scheme, attributed to the almost anime-like art style. This style is shown off more and more as the story progresses, with especially the Sheikah technology contrasting wonderfully with the rest of the world, in bright electric blues and dark glowing oranges. Ganon also leans into heavy contrast, with murky, mud-like reds and blacks. The story is actually what allows this game to be so wonderfully backdropped, and it begins, somewhat unconventionally, with a classic Zelda story. We've all seen the classic Zelda tale. Link fights Ganon, along with some friends, with some extra tools along the way, and then saves Hyrule. Well, not this time. Breath of the Wild's story actually begins with this, but then we see him fail, and Hyrule fall, leading to Link waking up 100 years later in the Shrine of Resurrection. Zelda remains in the castle, holding Ganon back from finishing what he started and destroying what remains of the land. You're fed the story very gradually, when you want to hear it, and it's this approach that makes me feel more invested in it. The story is extremely connected with the world you're exploring as well, so you feel more inclined to both discover more of the story and the world, so you can see how its events have affected it. There are 4 main races in Breath of the Wild: the Zora, the Rito, the Gerudo, and the Goron. Each has their own history, which can be seen by exploring around their 4 chosen domains. They also have their own cultures and attitudes, and their own problem with the divine beasts. These 4 divine beasts used to fight for Hyrule but were championed by one warrior of each species. But in the Calamity, these champions were killed and the divine beast taken over by Ganon. Your task in Breath of the Wild is to travel to all 4 corners of the world, regain control of the divine beasts, and defeat Ganon. Of course, you're perfectly within your rights to entirely ignore the story, which is exactly what I did, and this actually makes the challenge of reclaiming the divine beasts easier, as you'll become stronger as you find more and more shrines throughout the world. Talking of shrines and divine beasts, it's time to talk about what makes the game tick, and why the physics-driven sandbox of Breath of the Wild is one of its biggest successes, only surpassed by its world. You've probably seen the clips of players taking advantage of the physics in Breath of the Wild. There are so many ways to mess around with this system, and it never gets old. Think something will work to solve a puzzle? Odds are, it probably will. Nintendo has created a masterclass, not only in open world design, but also in how we can bend some of its elements to our will. This doesn't always go the way you want, however. Realistic amounts of fall damage, weapons breaking, rain making surfaces slippery, and being struck by lightning when you're holding metal weapons in a thunderstorm all work against you to make sure that Link is thoroughly grounded in the world. You're not some god able to temporarily freeze time, or move metal objects telekinetically, or summon great pillars of ice from the water. It's to the absolute credit of the game world that you always feel so tiny in it. If we look to the iceberg model of game design, then we can see exactly why this is so important. Imagine a whole world, being designed from the ground up by game developers. They have 2 main jobs that they have to accomplish in their mission to make a successful world. The first is the world has to be instantly engaging, and that there has to be enough going on at surface level to keep the player invested. The second is much more complicated. The first job was only the tip of the iceberg. To make a truly immersive world, the game designers have to hint enough at other things occurring and detail the in-world culture just enough that the player will always feel as if they're part of something bigger. Just because a game can only load so many assets at a time doesn't mean that there always has to be an impression of only those few assets existing at any one time. The land of Hyrule feels vast in Breath of the Wild, and it's because there's always an impression that you're part of a world, or something bigger than the few loaded scenes around you. Hyrule often feels quiet, haunted and desolate, but it never feels empty, which is truly a rarity for a game of this size. Anyway, going back to the physics sandbox, it's utilised in a number of ways, with the first way being the shrines. There are 3 main forms of progression in Breath of the Wild. Because weapons break so easily, Link never gets any stronger physically. He can only get more durable and gain more stamina. That's where the shrines come in. There are 120 shrines hidden across Hyrule, and each is a small puzzle leading to a spirit orb. 4 spirit orbs will get you an extra heart, or a check of stamina in your stamina wheel. These shrines engage in your puzzle solving ability and your knowledge of the game's physics, and can be decidedly tricky. almost all of the shrines are a great time, apart from a few motion control related shrines which just don't feel good to solve. Beyond shrines, we have the 4 divine beasts. Each of the 4 beasts is a puzzle box filled with challenges, similar to the dungeons of older Zelda games. These trials always culminate with a battle against the Blight of Ganon, which is suitably dramatic and difficult, depending on how many shrines you discovered beforehand. Lastly, we have the Korok seeds, 900 of which are hidden around the map in hard to reach places. They're a nice little reward for exploration, and they help you expand your storage for weapons, shields, and bows. Talking of weapons, it's finally time to talk about the combat in Breath of the Wild, and how it's simplistic, deep, and very, very clever. Combat in Breath of the Wild seems simplistic to start. There's a dodge, a block, and an attack. At the beginning of the game, enemies are fairly weak, as you'll mainly be coming across low-level bokoblins and moblins. As you play through the game, you'll discover more and more usages of the different combat buttons. The dodge button becomes a way of initiating a flurry rush, which is a quick series of strikes in slow motion, usually being enough to kill an enemy from full health. Blocking later becomes parrying, as you develop a sense of timing and are able to not only block and dodge, but parry with your shield, stunning the enemy and leaving an opening to attack. As you can see, combat in Breath of the Wild becomes deeper and deeper the more you play, and that's before you add in the aforementioned physics system. You can use your runes creatively in order to kill enemies, by dropping heavy metal boxes, freezing them in time before running up on them, or creating bombs to blow up explosive barrels. Fire arrows, electric arrows, ice arrows, bomb arrows, and ancient arrows can all be used to different effects in order to take down different enemies more effectively. For example, some enemies will have fire variants that can easily be dispatched with a well-placed ice arrow. In the rain, a shock arrow will deal a massive amount of AoE damage. Ancient arrows work especially well against guardians, the most challenging overworld enemies that can one-shot Link for most of the game. The variety of enemies isn't deep, but it's just deep enough to avoid overwhelming you, as each enemy attacks in a certain and specific way. Some will rush you, while others will prefer to stay back before leaping through the air to attack you with their spears. Breath of the Wild is never an easy game, and you'll die numerous times. The way that the game handles difficulty, however, is another ingenious touch from Nintendo. Most games of this size use level gating as an excuse to force you to spend longer in the easier areas of the game and engage more with the side quest content. In Breath of the Wild, Nintendo have stuck with your you can go anywhere philosophy all the way, even into the design of the enemies. Most enemies can be killed at any stage of the game, it only takes more and more skill the higher level they are. Enemies are classified by colour representing how strong they are. For instance, bokoblins are red at their weakest and black at their strongest. Stronger coloured enemies not only have more health, but they hit considerably harder and wield stronger weapons, making them worthwhile to take down. Some enemies are undoubtedly tougher than others. Lynels, for instance, which are consistently tougher and become absolute monsters later in the game when they become silver and gold, and Guardians, they don't scale in difficulty, but retain the ability to one-shot Link almost the entire way through the game, unless you're skilled enough to target their weak spot. The way that the game scales to your growing power is the true genius here, however, as every so often, a blood moon will occur. All the enemies Link has killed will respawn, but they'll be stronger and better equipped. This means that there's never a lack of enemies to hunt down, and camps of bokoblins to kill, and considering how satisfying combat is, that's never a bad thing. Considering the incredibly high bar Breath of the Wild reached, it's tough to imagine any sequel truly being able to match its success. Any game that is as highly regarded as Breath of the Wild will struggle to not make an underwhelming sequel. Tears of the Kingdom, however, seems to be going in the right direction. The key for any game that has high expectations due to a successful first entry is to not rest on its laurels. Granted, most people probably would have been happy for simply more Breath of the Wild, but it would have left a lot of people feeling more than a bit disappointed. With the incredible foundation that Breath of the Wild established, Tears of the Kingdom could be truly special. Luckily for us, that's exactly what Nintendo seems to be doing. They don't look to have been resting on the success that Breath of the Wild achieved, as early previews of Tears of the Kingdom have reported that it's a very different game to its predecessor. I just hope that it does Breath of the Wild justice, as it stands as one of my favourite games of all time, for so many reasons. I'm not alone in feeling like this, so it'll be interesting to see what Tears of the Kingdom's reviews look like next week. I'll be publishing a review roundup either the day before or on launch day, so if you're interested to see that, consider subscribing. I'll also be making a video on my early impressions of Redfall, which will be releasing sometime next week around Wednesday. With that, I hope you enjoy this look back at one of my favourite games. What were your thoughts on Breath of the Wild? Do you have any expectations or hopes for Tears of the Kingdom? Leave it all down in the comments. I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.